And here we go. And we are live. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. Hooray! We are in for a treat. It's been a while since we've been able to get together, so we have got a lot of work to do. We're going to knuckle down and please God, in Yirtzeh Hashem, if it is consistent with the divine will, we will get through 3 chapters tonight. We're going to hopefully do chapter 5, 6, and 7 of Maseches Arachin, kicking off, of course, as we always do at the beginning, with chapter 5. So we can get it up there on the screen. You can see that. And without further ado, let's get ourselves underway, shall we? So chapter 5, and we are going to be talking about kind of the differences between Arachin and pledges of Arachin and Nedarim and vows, and the different impact that it might have depending on what you are pledging. So the Mishnah says in chapter 5, Mishnah 1, Mishnah Aleph, Ha'omer, a person who says, Mishkali alai, I am going to pledge, I'm going to donate to the temple the equivalent of my weight. So they don't specify the coinage of what they're going to be giving. And so what we see is that you can give whatever kind of currency, I guess, you want to give. A person who says Mishkali alai, no say Mishkala, they will give according to their weight. In Kesef, Kesef. If they've got silver, they will give that amount in silver. In Zahav, Zahav. If they've got gold, they will give it in gold. If they didn't specify, or sorry, if he specified silver, then he'd give it in silver. If he didn't specify, if he specified silver, he gives it in silver. If he specified gold, he gives it in gold. Says the Mishnah, Maaseh be'imah shel Yirmatya, there was a story that happened, an incident that happened involving the mother of Yirmatya, Sha'amra Mishkal Biti Alai, who said, I pledge the weight of my daughter, and I'm going to donate that amount to the Beis HaMikdash. She went to Jerusalem, Ushkaluha, and she weighed her, V'nasna Mishkala Zahav, and she paid out in gold. And so what we see from here is that if a person can afford gold, then they should give gold. Otherwise, they give whatever it is that they can afford. Mishkal Yadi Alai. What if a person says that they are pledging the weight of their arm to the Beis Mikdash? How do you weigh that? How do you weigh a living limb? If you plonk it on the scale, it's not necessarily going to give you an accurate readout of the actual weight of your arm. And if you cut your arm off just to weigh it, then you're going to be in trouble because now you don't have an arm. So how are you going to do it? So says Rabbi Yehuda Omer, you have to use water displacement theory. So Mamale Chavis Mayim, you fill up a barrel of water, Umachnisa ad marpeko, and you put your arm into that water up to your elbow. V'shokel basar chamor, and then you take donkey flesh and you weigh it, v'gidin vatsamos, and you weigh it with its sinews and its bones. And the assumption here is that donkey bones with the flesh is as dense as the limb of a human arm. So you weigh the donkey arm or whatever, and the nosen lesocha asher tismale, and then you I think you do the same kind of experiment, putting the limb of the donkey into the water until you kind of reach the same point as you would have done with a human arm. And then by weighing how much of the donkey limb you've used to reach the same water displacement, that's then how much you can pledge, or that's how you weigh the equivalent of your arm by using this particular scientific method. There's just one problem, which is Rabbi Yossi doesn't agree with it. I'm a Rabbi Yossi. It's really not as precise as you might like to think, says Rabbi Yossi. You don't get a perfectly accurate measurement. And therefore, says Rabbi Yossi, Ela shamin esayad Kamahi Ra'uya Lishkol. Therefore, he says, you should estimate how much the arm is likely to weigh, and in so doing, that's how much you know to then pledge to the Beis Hamikdash. Mishnah base, Demei Yodi Olai. If a person says that they are going to donate the value of their arm to the Beis Hamikdash, so then Shamin Asar. So then you have to appraise this, you have to estimate this, you have to value this. Kamahu Shave Biad. How much would he be worth in the marketplace if he was to be sold as a slave, if he had two hands? The Kamahu Shave Beloyad. And how much would he be worth if he has only one hand? So it's quite a significant difference. But by doing that, you'll know how much your arm is worth, because you deduct your value from being sold as a slave with one arm to a slave with two arms, and the difference in those valuations will tell you how valuable your arm is. The Mishnah says, this is the difference between Nadarim and Arachin, where you see that an element to a neder, to a vow, can yield a stricter halachic application than with an Arachin valuation. And there are halachot where you are stricter when it comes to Arachin than you are with Nadarim. Fundamentally, it can be stricter for a neder, because if you pledge the erech of your hand, then you pay nothing, because an erech is only going to be activated if you're pledging it on a life-dependent limb. Whereas if you were to pledge and make a neder that the value of a particular non-life dependent limb is what you want to donate, then you can value that and you can give it. So that's a stringency by Nadarim than it is by Arachin. Says the Mishnah, Ketzad, Ha'omer Erki Alai Vames. What are some of these practical differences? So the Mishnah says, if a person says that they are going to donate their erech, their value, to their biblical value, to the Beis Hamikdash, Vames, and then they die. So now what should happen? Mishnah says, Yitnu Hayarshin. The heirs are going to pay still on behalf of the father, because he's already pledged his value at the time of his living to the Beis Hamikdash. Domai alai vames. But if he was to say that his market value should be pledged to the Beis Hamikdash and then he dies, lo yitnu hayarshin, then the payment is not going to fall upon the heirs, she'ein damim v'meisa, because he's not worth anything now as a dead man. Erech yadi ve'erech ragli alai. If a person says that they pledge the erech of their arm and the erech of their leg, then lo amar klum. That's not going to count for anything. It's not going to activate the obligation for you to pay up. Why? Because these are not life-threatening limbs, and so if you pledge those limbs, it's not going to have any halachic binding impact. But, says the Mishnah, erech roshi ve'erech kavedi alai. But if you pledge the value of your head or the value of your liver, then no sein erech kula. Since these are life-dependent limbs, you are going to have to pay the full whack, because you have just gone and pledged the value of your life biblically as it stands, and so that has to be paid to the Beis Hamikdash. Zeh haklal. This is the rule. Davar shehaneshama teluya bo. Any part of your body on which your soul relies is going to nosen erech kula. It's going to activate the need to pay the value, the complete biblical value of yourself, even though you've only tried to pledge particular parts of your body. Mishnah Gimel. What if chatzi erki alai? He says half of the value of me I pledge. So then the Mishnah says no sin chatzi erka. That's okay. You can give half of your valuation. What about erech chetzi alai? What if I say that I'm going to pledge the value of half of me. So not half of my value, but half of me. No sen erech kula. So then you have to give your full amount, because if you were to cut yourself in half, right, half of your body is a life-dependent element of you. And so Mishnah says if you were to pledge half of your body, then you would have to give the full amount. Chatzi damai alai. If you pledge that you are going to give as a neder your half of your market value, no sin chatzi damav, then you can give half of your market value. Demei chetzi alai. But if you pledge to give the value of half of you, then the Mishnah says no sen demei kula. You have to give the whole market value. Again, because this is the same rules, they are klal. Davar shana shama tuliyabo noten erech kula. That if you are pledging something which your life depends on, it's going to activate the need to pay for the entire amount. Mishnah Daled. Ha'omer erko shel ploni alai. If a person says that they are going to donate the value of a particular individual, meis hanoda ve'nidar yitnu hayoshim. So if the one who made the promise and the subject of the promise die, yitnu hayoshim, the heirs still have to pay out. Damav shel ploni alai. If they pledge the market value as a neder, as a vow, to the Beis Hamikdash of a particular individual, meis hanoda yitnu hayoshim. If the person who made the promise dies, then the heirs will have to honor the pledge. Meis hanidar, but if the subject of the vow dies, lo yitnu hayoshim, then the heirs do not need to pay up, she'ein damim lamason, because there's no value for the dead person. He's not worth anything anymore because he is dead. Whereas when they do have to pay out, it's because the pledge was in effect when he died, and so it had to be seen through. Mishnah, hey, a basic difference between someone with a neder upon himself and a nedava, which is a promise made on a specific item. So a difference between someone who makes a neder upon himself and a nedava, which is a pledge on a particular specific item. So it says the Mishnah in Mishnah Hey, Shor ze ola. If a person says that this particular bull is going to be a korban ola, bias ze korban, or he says that the house is going to be sanctified as a korban, meis hashor, if the animal dies, v'nafal abayis, and the house collapses, eina chayav l'shalem, so then he's going to be exempt from honoring this commitment. But this is one of our first tricky ones of the evening, assuming everything else I've been saying has been pretty understandable. But this is where it starts to get tricky for me, at least. If a person says, Demei shor ze olai ola, so they pledge the value of a bull, but they also specify that it's a particular bull. So the value of this particular bull should be on me, on this person, as a korban ola. Or demei bias ze olai korban, or the value of this house should be upon him as a korban. Meis hashor of a nafal habayis, if the animal dies or the house collapses, then chayav l'shalem, then they will be obligated to pay. And it's basically because the fact that you pledged the value of the animal, that will cancel out the fact that you said that particular animal. Right? So whereas in the first instance you pledged a particular animal, a particular house, something happens to those two things, so you can't honor that pledge anymore. In the second case, because you are pledging the value of a particular house, that commitment can still remain even if the house collapses or the animal dies. So if you hadn't kind of contradicted yourself with that particular pledge, then you wouldn't have to honor that pledge whatever happens to the thing. Mishnah Vav, and our last Mishnah of this chapter, Chayave Arachin, someone who pledges a chiyuv, someone who is obligated to pay an Arachin pledge and hasn't paid it yet. The Mishnah says, Mamashkin or son, the temple would have the right to seize your property in lieu of payment if you were not paying up. If a person was obligated to bring sin offerings and guilt offerings, which are voluntary, so then the Mishnah says, Ein mamashkenin osan. Then the Beis Din would not be able to seize the property in lieu of payment. So these are not voluntary; they're obligatory offerings, and therefore the person is not going to delay in bringing them, and therefore the Beis Din doesn't have to take such drastic measures. Chayave olos ushlamim. When it comes to people who obligate themselves to give voluntary burnt offerings and voluntary peace offerings, mamashkin osan afalpi she'ein miskaper lo ad sheyisratza. So the Beis Din, acting on behalf of the temple, would be able to seize property to be able to get that donation paid up, even though you're not going to get the kapara, the atonement that you need, until you've actually brought it. And so you would think that that's a motivation. Nonetheless, the Mishnah says that the Beis Din can seize your property and can incentivize you with that threat. So even though that's the case, they would still be allowed to. Shneimar, as it says in the pasuk in Vayikra from last week's parasha, says lirtsono, that it has to be done with your permission, with your volition. And the Mishnah learns out kofin oso ashiyome rotzani, that if it's an instance where we are expecting you to be up for doing it, and you're motivated for doing it, and you do this by your own compulsion, the Mishnah actually learns out that you can be forced into situations where you have to get this thing done, even if it means being forced, even if it means having your property seized by the Beis Din. And the Mishnah says as well, we see this with people giving gets to divorce themselves from their wives, that you could be forced with different threats and different incentives. You could be forced into giving this get until and forcing you to the point where you say, yes, I actually do want this. And fundamentally at play is the fact that deep down we very much do want to do the right thing. And so therefore all the Beis Din is doing is just incentivizing or coercing a person to do what they ultimately really wanted and needed to be doing anyway. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, we say Mazel Tov on completing chapter 5. And we dive straight in to chapter 6, dealing with general issues of Hekdesh, of things which get pledged and sanctified to the Beis HaMikdash. And we move into talking about fields and redeeming them from Hekdesh. So if a person sanctified their field for Hekdesh and then subsequently wanted to redeem them, so that's what we're going to be covering. And Mishnah Aleph starts by talking about the assessment and announcement process when it comes to the valuation of land. So the Mishnah says, Shum Hayasomim, when it comes to the value of land owned by orphans, which we don't usually sell if it's land inherited by orphans who are kids, unless the father was in debt. So Shum HaHekdesh, when you've got consecrated land, Shum HaYasomim, when you've got land inherited by orphans, which are children, which is being sold to be able to repay a father's debt, then Shloshim Yom, you give 30 days for assessment and as an announcement in order to be able to get the best price for it. V'shum ha-Hekdesh, and to be able to publicize consecrated land which is available for redemption. So you give 60 days notice. Umachrizin baboker uva'erev, and you announce that these things are available in the morning and in the evening. Says the Mishnah, Hamakdish nechasav, a person who sanctifies his possessions to the Beis Hamikdash, v'haisa alav kasubas isha, and he actually is married, and the land that he is consecrating is written into the kasuba as something that could be paid out to the wife. So what do you do in that kind of situation where you've consecrated this land, the land is otherwise in need of being paid out to a woman's ketubah for the instance of a divorce? So Rabbi Eliezer says, Keshe Yigar Shena, when he divorces her, Yadir Hana'ah, he should make a vow that she is forbidden to him. Why does Rabbi Eliezer say this? Because by doing that, they can't do, I think we're trying to prevent a shtick, we're trying to prevent collusion over here. So if you've consecrated land which is available for redemption, then if that land is otherwise tied to a kasuba, we're afraid that he's going to purposely divorce his wife. She will redeem this land, and then they can get remarried, and through that collusion, they can basically get this land back without any problems. So Rabbi Eliezer says they have to get divorced so that she can have the land, and they're now not allowed to remarry, and that way you avoid that collusion. Rabbi Yehoshua says nothing doing. You don't need to do this, because fundamentally, even though there is a concern about collusion, there is also the possibility that he could somehow renege on his oath, and in so doing be able to get back the land without having to get divorced. So Rabbi Yehoshua says he doesn't need to do that. Kayotzebo, in a similar vein, Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Af he'arev la'isha b'ksuvasa v'haya ba'ala megarsha, that even if it's the case of he'arev la'isha b'ksuvasa, the case of a guarantor of a woman for her marriage contract, v'haya ba'ala megarsha, and her husband is divorcing her and couldn't pay this debt, Yadir Hana'ah, then he has to take a vow that she will be forbidden to him. Shema Yaseh Kanunya, in case they team up and collude together al Nachasav Shelzeh, on this property, and V'yachazir Eseshto, and then he goes and remarries her and then solves all of these problems. So in order to solve these problems of kanunya, of collusion, that is the halacha laid out by the Mishnah, that he would have to, if he's going to divorce her and in so doing pay off this debt, then he's going to have to do that without the ability to then remarry her and take the land back. Mishnah base, Hamakdish nechasa v'haisa alav kasubas isha ubal chod. If a person consecrates his property and there is an outstanding debt of the need to pay off this woman's kasuba, his wife's kasuba, and ubal chov, and he also owes money, so he has a creditor on his heels. So then, ein ha'isha yechola ligbos kasubasa min ha'hekdesh. So the wife is not entitled to collect payment of her kasuba from anything that was consecrated to the Beis Hamikdash. V'lo bal chov es chavo, and the person who he owes money to is also not able to get payment back from this land, this property that has been consecrated to the Beis Hamikdash. Ela hapoder almanas letein laisha kasubasa ulabal choves chava. Rather, whoever it is that ends up redeeming this land should do so on the condition that the value, that the proceeds are going to go towards paying off this kasuba or paying off this loan. Hekdesh tishin maneh, v'hayachov me'ah maneh. If he consecrated 90 maneh, which is, according to the screen here, 9,000 dinars, v'hayachov me'ah dinar, me'ah maneh, and he owes 100 maneh, or 10,000 dinars, then the Mishnah says, Mosif owed dinar, so then the creditor would add an additional dinar, ufodebo es hanachasim halalu, and that way he can redeem this property on the condition then that he's going to either pay this money back to the woman, to the wife, or he's going to pay his loan back to his back to the person who he took the loan from, the lender. As I said, some of this stuff is a bit too. I'm not great at business, but hopefully it makes some semblance of sense. Mishnah Gimel. Afal pish amru chayave arachin mamashkin osan. Even though we said earlier that if a person has an outstanding obligation to pay the value of himself, and we said mamashkin in osan, that we can seize property in order to be able to honor that payment, the Mishnah says you can't leave them completely without anything. So what would the Beis Din have to leave him with if you were having to seize his possessions? So the Mishnah says nosnin lomazon shloshim yom. You have to leave him with at least 30 days worth of food. Uchsus shnei masar chodesh, and enough clothes to suffice him for a year. Umitam witzas, and you'd have to leave him with bed sheets that he can sleep in. The sandalim, you'd have to leave him with his shoes. But tefillin, you'd have to leave him with his tefillin as well. However, they do not have to leave items belonging to wife and children, because they can't have been consecrated by that individual anyway. So they can only take stuff that directly impacts on him. Imhaya uman, if he was a craftsman, a professional, nosnin lo shnei chlei umanus mikol min v'min. So then they can leave him 2 of every type of his tools, so that he can at least continue his work. Charash, if he was a carpenter, nosnin lo shnei matzadin ushtei megeros. So then you can leave him with 2 of his chisels and 2 of his saws. Rabbi Eliezer says, Imhaya ikar, if he was a farmer, nosnin lo et simdo, then you can leave him with a pair of his cattle, so that he can carry on some work. The chamar, and if he was a donkey driver, nosnin lo es chamara, then you can't seize his donkey, or you can't seize his taxi cab. So he has to be able to maintain the ability to survive, and the ability also to earn some money too. Mishnah Daled. Hayalo min echad merube umin echad mu'at. If you have many types of a particular tool and fewer of a different type of tool, so then we don't have to say to him to take from the what are we saying? We're saying that I think what we're saying is we don't say that we have to sell let's say he's got 3 saws and he's got 1 chisel. So he doesn't have to sell 1 of his saws so that he now has 2 of each. Rather, you can give 2 types from the meruba, from the type of tool that he has many of, and then whatever happens to the few can remain with him. If a person consecrates all of his property, then the treasurer, the person who's collecting the seizing these assets, could even take the tefillin. I think, is that what we're saying? That's what it seems to be saying. That's not what I thought it said. Okie dokie. Mishnah Hey. What is not included when he consecrates his items? What did he have no intention of ever including? What won't they take as collateral? What won't they seize? So echad hamakdish es nechasav, whether he is consecrating his property, ve'echad hamarech es atzmo, or whether he is pledging the value of himself, ein lo lo b'chsus ishta. He was never planning that the clothing of his wife could be repossessed, ve'lo b'chsus banav, or the clothing of his children. They have no right to take these things. Ve'lo bat sevash tzava'an nishman, and any dyed clothing that was dyed for the sake of giving to these to the wife or to the children, even if they haven't worn them yet, but the clothes have been dyed a particular color, intending for them to go on to be owned by the wife or the children. Not with new shoes that have been purchased for them. Even though we've said elsewhere that slaves can be sold in nice clothing to be able to be valued higher at the market. Because if he was wearing that if you were to buy him clothing worth 30 dinar, then mashbiach umaneh, then his value would appreciate by 100 dinars. And similarly with a cow that you were waiting to take to marketplace, which could appreciate in value, or with a gem, a pearl that is going to appreciate in value. You'll get more money for it if you sell it in the city. The temple coffers only have the right to seize an item based on its current location and based on its current value at that time. So even though it could increase in value depending on different conditions of sale and where you are, nonetheless, the based in the temple would not have the right to seize these items if they could be worth more in a different set of circumstances. And with that, we attempt to say Mazel Tov on completing chapter 6. And let's dive into chapter 7, Perek Zayin, where we're talking about stay achuzah and stay mikneh, fields which can get purchased and fields which are ancestrally owned, because every field in Eretz Yisrael is theoretically allocated to a particular family. When the land was divided up, so that would mean then that of the land divided up amongst the tribes, particular fields would have been owned by particular families. So if it is owned by that family, it is called a stay achuzah, I guess you could say an ancestral field. If it is traded, then it's called a stay mikneh. So that field would then be under new ownership until the Jubilee, at which point everything would be reset and land would be returned to the original owners. So Mishnah Aleph, we're talking about stay achuzah, which could get consecrated. So the Mishnah says, well, fundamentally, if a person was to consecrate an ancestral field, right, it's owned by you, but you want to sanctify it, you want to consecrate it to the Beis Hamikdash. Subsequently, you want to redeem it. How much is that going to be worth? Because at the end of 50 years, it's going to be redeemed anyway. Yeah? So that means that there's going to be a depreciation in value each year of a 50-year cycle. And we've talked about this before, but the price of redemption is going to be based on the numbers of years left until the Jubilee and the size of the land. And it's basically 50 shekels for every 75,000 squared amot. So each year that passes, that 50 shekels per 75,000 amot squared is going to would depreciate in value by 1 shekel and 1/48th. 1 and 1/48th of a shekel. Otherwise known as, where's the word? Where is the word? Sela upundion, right? So that is the value that would be deducted each year. So the Mishnah says, "Ein makdishin lifnei hayovel pachos mishtei shtanim." You're not going to be able to consecrate an ancestral field within 2 years of a jubilee, and I guess because the value is going to be too small. V'lo goalin la'achar hayovel pachot mishana, and you're not going to be able to redeem a field within the first year of a jubilee. I think that's correct. Ein mechashvin chadashin lahekdesh. You do not count particular months in order to lower the price to be paid back to Hekdesh. Aval ha-Hekdesh mechashev chadashim. But when it works out in favor of the temple, then you would be able to count months, and that would be in order to, based on so for example, if there's less than 2 full years in, so it will benefit the Hekdesh to say that you owe 50. But if it's at the end of the cycle, then it's not going to work out in their favor to have the redemption value being less, and so you wouldn't be able to do it in that situation. If you were to consecrate your field during the Jubilee, and then you want to redeem it, then you are giving this value of 50 shekels for every 75,000 square amma. If there are ditches which are 10 tefachim deep, or slayim gavoim asara tefachim, or rocks protruding out of the land that are 10 tefachim high, and therefore they're useless for being considered as a vital part of the field, ein nimdadin iman, they're not going to be measured with the rest of the field. We're talking about productive field space. Pachos mekan nimdadin iman, but if they are less than this size, then they would be included in the value. Hekdisha shtaim or shalosh shanim lifnei hayova, if you consecrate the field 2 or 3 years before the Jubilee, nosen selo pundion mashana, so then you would give 1 and 1/48th of a shekel for each of these years. Im Amar, if a person said, Hareini nosen davar shana b'shana, if they say that they're going to pay in installments, so that each year they're basically paying this 1 and 1/48th of a shekel, and they're paying in installments, Ein shamin lo, we don't listen, ela nosen is kulo ke'echad, rather he's supposed to give the entire sum in one payment. Mishnah base. The original owner redeeming an ancestral field would pay an extra fifth. Echad haba'alim ve'echad kol adam. Whether it's an owner, whether it is any other person who is redeeming this field, they're entitled to do so. But the Mishnah asks, Ma bein haba'alim lebein kol adam. What's the difference between owner redeeming and any other person? The Mishnah says, Ela sha'abalim nosni chomesh. The owner would have to give an extra fifth in addition to the payment. The kol adam ein onesin chomesh, and other people who are redeeming the field would not have to give this extra fifth of the value. Mishnah Gimel. Hekdisha uga'ala. If a person consecrated the ancestral field and then he redeemed it himself, the Mishnah says, Eino yotza miyado bayovel. So it is not removed from his possession to be divided among the priests, among the Kohanim, during the Jubilee year. Ga'ala bano, but if his son was to redeem the field, Yotza la'aviv bayovel, then it is going to be removed from the son's possession and given back to the father in the Jubilee year. Gala acher, or echad min akrovim, if someone else came and redeemed it, or a relative came, Ga'ala miyado, and redeemed it from his possession, Eino yotza miyado bayovel, then it is is that correct? the field is removed from the owner's possession and given to the Kohanim during the Jubilee year, during Yovel. Is that what we're saying? That's what the screen says, but it says Eina Yotza. Maybe there's a correction there. Is there a correction? Yeah, I think there must be a correction. Let's see what it says in the thing. Eina Yotza on the other way around. Oh, I don't know. If one of the Kohanim were to redeem the field from Hekdesh, now it's under his custody. He can't say, since it's going to go to the Kohanim during the Jubilee year, and it's anyway under my possession at the moment, so it should be for me. Rather, the field is removed from his possession, it would be divided amongst all of the Kohanim at that time. Mishnah Daled. What happens if Yovel arrives and it's not been redeemed? So Higia HaYovel v'lo nigala. If he had consecrated the field to Hekdesh and the Jubilee year arrived and it had not been redeemed by the owner or by anyone else, so then then there's three opinions in order to make sure that Hekdesh receive fair compensation. First opinion, Rabbi Yehuda, he says the Kohanim can enter into the field and give its redemption payment to the temple treasury. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So the Kohanim get it, but they have to pay the value of 50 sa'ah per 75,000 square amas. Rabbi Shimon says, Nichnasin avalo nosnin, they get it for free and it starts all over again. They enter into the field, but they don't have to pay anything to the base of Hekdesh. Rabbi Eliezer Omer lo nichnasin v'lo nosnin, they don't enter into the field and they don't give the redemption payment to the temple coffers. Ella nikres sedei retushin. Rather, it's called an abandoned field, a neglected field. Ad hayovel hasheni, until the second Jubilee year. Higia hayovel hasheni v'lo nigala. If the second Jubilee arrives and it's still not been redeemed, nikres retushin ad hayovel hashnishi. So then it's called a doubly abandoned field, and it goes until the third Jubilee. And really, in any case, the Kohanim are not allowed into a consecrated field until it has been redeemed, first of all. Mishnah Hey, a difference between an ancestral field, a stei achuzah, and a stei mikneh, a field which has been acquired. Says the Mishnah, if a person buys a field from his father, who is the ancestral owner, Meis Aviv, so he would have at one point been entitled to this land as inheritance. So Meis Aviv, if the father dies, V'achar kach hikdisha, and then afterwards the son consecrates it, Harehi ki stei achuzah, gets treated like a stei achuzah, like an ancestral field. Since it was inherited and it was his anyway, he can consecrate it to the Beis Hamikdash. Hikdisha v'achar kach Meis Aviv. But what if he consecrated it as the owner, and then his father died? The Mishnah says, Harehi kistei mikneh, divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says it should be treated like a purchased field, and not like an ancestral field. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon Omrim, kistei achuzah. It should be treated like an ancestral field, shneimar, as it says, V'im est sadeh miknato asher lo mistei achuzaso. And if it was a field that he has bought, which is not his ancestral field, so there the Mishnah learns out, sadeh she'ena ra'uya lios sadeh achuzah. This is referring to a field that could never be a stei achuzah. That should be what we call a stei mikneh, an acquired field. Yot says, zo she'i ra'uya listos achuzah. But this would exclude this property that he bought from the father, because one day that is going to be an ancestral field, and therefore the halacha should be different. Says the Mishnah, stei mikna eino yotze lakanim b'yovel. A purchased field is not removed from the possession of the temple treasury and given to the Kohanim during Yovel, because fundamentally a person cannot consecrate something that does not belong to him. Kohanim Leviim makdishim le'olam. Kohanim and Leviim are entitled to consecrate their ancestral fields, v'goalin le'olam, and they can always redeem them. Bein lifnei hayovel, bein la'achar yovel, both before the Jubilee year and both after the Jubilee year. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we say Mazel Tov on completing chapter 7 of Maseches Arachin, which leaves us now with just 2 parakim to go before moving on to our next Masechta, Maseches Tamura, which is also really hard, but then there's only 7 parakim of that, and that moves on to Krisus, which has only got 6 parakim, and then we're into Me'ilah, which has only got, I think, 6 parakim as well, and then we're into Tamid, which only has 7, and then it gets easy with Masechet Midot, which only has a few parakim, and then before you know it, we're at the end of Seder Kodshim. So not long to go, guys. Keep up the good work, and we will see you on the next one. So for now, we say thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful and meaningful night.